Censors slapped X ratings on westerns and called them obscene. Studios buried prints to avoid prosecution. One director fled the country after screening his film. These 15 westerns pushed violence so far that authorities tried to make sure you'd never see them. Number 15. Cutthroats Nine. Joaquin Luis Romero, Marchant directed Cutthroats Nine in 1972, and it's one of the most relentlessly bleak westerns ever made. The Spanish title translates to Condenados a Vivir, which means condemned to live, and that's exactly what the film depicts. A sergeant escorts 7 convicts through a blizzard in the mountains, and they turn on each other like animals. The film was shot in the Spanish Pyrenees during actual winter conditions, and the cast and crew genuinely suffered. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Robert Hundar, playing the lead, developed frostbite. The misery on screen is real because the people making it were genuinely cold and exhausted. What got Cutthroats 9 banned in multiple countries was its graphic violence. People are decapitated, limbs are hacked off with axes, a woman is assaulted and frozen to death. The violence isn't stylized or cartoonish. It's ugly and brutal, shot in harsh winter light that makes blood look black against white snow. The film cost about $100,000 and was shot as a Spanish-Italian co-production. It played drive-ins and grindhouses in America under various titles, often with additional cuts to avoid X ratings. The uncut version remained banned in the UK until 2007. Critics who saw it called it unwatchable sadism with no redeeming value. Marchant defended it as an anti-Western, showing the frontier as hell rather than romantic adventure. The film has no heroes, no redemption, just people destroying each other in an indifferent landscape. Cutthroats. Nine influenced later survival horror westerns, proving you could strip away every pleasant element of the genre and still tell a compelling story. Whether anyone should want to watch that story is another question entirely. Number 14. Django Kill, If You Live, Shoot.
There's plenty of rope to spare in this town and little else.
Giulio Questi directed Django Kill in 1967, and it's one of the weirdest, most violent spaghetti westerns ever made. The title includes Django to capitalize on the successful film, but this has nothing to do with that character. Thomas Millian plays a half-breed gunfighter who survives a massacre and seeks revenge using gold bullets. The film is a fever dream of violence and surrealism. A man is scalped alive on screen. Another is torn apart by a mob fighting over gold coins in his stomach. A young boy is shot point blank. The gay villains, an unusual choice for 1967, keep a harem of young men. Everything about the film feels off and transgressive. Questi was an avant-garde filmmaker making his first Western, and he approached it like experimental art rather than exploitation. The violence is graphic but also symbolic, representing capitalism's dehumanizing effects. That artistic pretension didn't stop censors from banning it in multiple countries. The film was shot in Italy for minimal budget, maybe $150,000. The color palette is deliberately garish, all blood reds and sickly yellows that make everything look diseased. The score by Ivan Vandor is discordant and unsettling, refusing to provide the catchy themes typical of spaghetti westerns. Django Kill was butchered by distributors. The American version cut over 20 minutes of violence and homosexual content. The British version cut even more. The full uncut version wasn't widely available until DVD releases in the 2000s. The film bombed commercially and effectively ended Questi's brief filmmaking career. He made only 2 more films before giving up. Critics dismissed it as incoherent trash. Cult film enthusiasts later rediscovered it, praising its willingness to be genuinely transgressive rather than just violent. Number 13. 4 of the Apocalypse.
Be forgiven, and you'll go straight to heaven. My dear Mrs. Preston. Before that, your husband.
Can't you tell by looking at his face? Push! He loves you more than a flea loves blood.
Lucio Fulci directed 4 of the Apocalypse in 1975, and it's the most nihilistic Western the Italian gore master ever made. The film follows 4 outcasts: a gambler, a pregnant prostitute, a drunk, and a mentally disabled man trying to survive in a lawless frontier town. Then they encounter Chaco, played by Thomas Millian, a psychotic bandit who tortures them for entertainment. Fulci was famous for zombie gore films, and he brought that same unflinching approach to violence here. The torture sequences are extended and graphic. A man is branded with hot irons. The pregnant woman is whipped and loses her baby. The mentally disabled man is shot in the stomach and dies slowly over multiple scenes. What makes Fort of the Apocalypse particularly disturbing is how Fulci dwells on suffering. He doesn't cut away or suggest violence off screen. He shows every moment of pain in close-up, forcing viewers to witness degradation they can't escape. The film argues the frontier was a place where the strong tortured the weak with impunity. The film was shot in Italy and Spain for about $300,000. Fulci used bright, oversaturated colors that make the violence look almost psychedelic. The score by Franco Bixio is melancholic and beautiful, creating jarring contrast with the brutality on screen. 4 of the Apocalypse was banned in the UK and heavily cut in most countries where it played. The full version didn't receive proper distribution until decades later. Critics savaged it as torture porn disguised as a Western. Even Fulci fans found it hard to defend. The film made minimal money and convinced Fulci to stick with horror. He returned to zombies and gore films where extreme violence was expected. Number 12. Keoma.
Jött a járvány. A fertőzött kutak miatt. És Kódvár senkit nem engedett ki a városból, csak a halál.
Enzo Castellari directed Keoma in 1976, and it's one of the most violent and beautifully shot westerns Italy ever produced. Franco Nero plays Keoma, a half-breed gunfighter returning home after the Civil War to find his town controlled by a gang spreading plague and terrorizing survivors. The film is part Western, part apocalyptic nightmare. The violence in Keoma is constant and brutal. People die from disease, shown with running sores and wasting bodies. Gunfights leave men screaming with belly wounds. A pregnant woman gives birth while bleeding to death. Castellari doesn't romanticize frontier violence. He makes it horrifying and tragic. What sets Keoma apart is I.H. Parolin's cinematography. The film is gorgeous, using filters and lighting to create images that look like Renaissance paintings. That beauty makes the violence more disturbing because it's happening in such a visually stunning world. The contrast is deliberate and effective. The score by Guido and Maurizio De Angelis is unconventional, mixing folk music with rock elements and a narrator singing the story. It shouldn't work, but it does, giving the film an epic mythological quality. Keoma feels less like a realistic Western and more like a violent folktale. The film cost about $400,000 and made modest returns in Europe. American distributors picked it up for drive-ins and grindhouses, cutting violence to avoid an X rating. The uncut version remains difficult to find in America for decades. Critics praise the cinematography while condemning the violence as excessive. Castellari defended it as necessary to show the frontier's brutality honestly. Keoma isn't entertainment. It's a tragedy about a man trying to do good in a world determined to destroy him. Number 11. A Bullet. For the General.
Muchachos! Let's be happy! We've had a good day! Let's sing! Vamos! Adelita!
And you?
I'm always on the move with my boy.
Damiano Damiani directed A Bullet for the General in 1967, and it's one of the most politically radical westerns ever made. The film is set during the Mexican Revolution and explicitly supports the revolutionaries against American imperialism. Gian Maria Volonté plays El Chuncho, a bandit who robs trains to fund the revolution. Lou Castel plays Bill Tate, an American advisor who has his own agenda. The violence in A Bullet for the General is graphic and politically motivated. Federal soldiers massacre peasants in extended sequences that show women and children being shot. Revolutionaries execute prisoners without trial. The film doesn't flinch from showing that revolutionary violence is just as brutal as government violence, but it argues one is justified and the other isn't. What got the film in trouble wasn't just the violence, but the politics. The film is openly Marxist, depicting American involvement in Mexico as exploitative and murderous. Bill Tate is eventually revealed to be a CIA agent sent to assassinate the revolutionary general. El Chuncho executes him, choosing the revolution over money and American friendship. The film cost about $350,000 and was shot in Spain and Mexico. Damiani used documentary-style cinematography to make the revolution feel immediate and real. The dust, the heat, the poverty, all of it was filmed with harsh realism. American distributors heavily edited A Bullet for the General, cutting political dialogue and toning down violence. The full version was considered too inflammatory during the Vietnam War era. Some Southern theater chains refused to book it entirely, fearing it would radicalize audiences. Critics were divided along political lines. Leftist critics praised it as revolutionary cinema. Conservative critics called it communist propaganda. The film influenced later political westerns, but remained controversial for its explicit anti-American stance. Number 10. And God Said to Cain.
The saloon may blow away, but the booze will be safe.
You got a brain in your head.
Antonio Margheriti directed And God Said to Cain in 1970, and it's one of the darkest revenge westerns ever made. Klaus Kinski plays Gary Hamilton, a man sentenced to 10 years hard labor for a crime he didn't commit. When he's finally pardoned, he returns home to find the men who framed him have become wealthy and respected. He culls them all one by one during a single night. The film is structured like a horror movie, with Hamilton stalking through a mansion during a thunderstorm, culling people in creative ways. He uses a scythe, barbed wire, drowning, anything available. Kinski plays him as a ghost or a demon, something inhuman driven purely by vengeance. What makes And God Said to Cain disturbing is how it presents murder as righteous. Hamilton isn't conflicted or reluctant. He methodically executes everyone responsible for destroying his life, and the film treats this as justice. There's no moral ambiguity, no suggestion that revenge might be wrong. The men deserve death, and Hamilton delivers it. Margheriti shot the film in Italy for about $200,000, using gothic horror aesthetics unusual for westerns. The mansion is full of shadows and cobwebs. Thunder crashes constantly. The whole thing feels more like a vampire film than a traditional western. The violence was too graphic for many markets. British censors cut multiple callings. American distributors added cuts and released it with minimal promotion. The full version circulated mainly in Italy and Spain, where censorship was less strict. Kinski gives one of his most intense performances, which is saying something. He barely speaks, just stares with those unsettling eyes while murdering people. The film suggests vengeance transforms people into monsters, but it also suggests some people deserve to be killed by monsters. And number 9. Companeros.
Why must I? Because the side we're on is the side of reason.
It's very good. Very comfortable. It's the only one we have.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sergio Corbucci directed Companeros in 1970, and it's one of the most violent and politically charged Zapata westerns ever made. Franco Nero plays a Swedish arms dealer, and Thomas Milian plays a Mexican revolutionary, and together they rescue a pacifist professor who knows the combination to a safe full of money needed to fund the revolution. The film opens with a massacre. Federal troops gun down revolutionaries, including women and children. Bodies pile up in streets. The violence is graphic and prolonged, establishing immediately that this is a war without rules or mercy. Corbucci wanted audiences uncomfortable from the first scene. Jack Palance plays John, a marijuana-smoking American mercenary who keeps a hawk that pecks out people's eyes. His introduction shows the hawk attacking a man's face in graphic detail. Palance plays John as completely immoral, calling for money and pleasure without distinction. He's one of the most disturbing villains in any Western. The political content is as extreme as the violence. The film depicts the Mexican Revolution as a just cause betrayed by opportunists and American interference. The professor, played by Fernando Rey, is a pacifist who realizes violence is necessary to overthrow tyranny. That message was too radical for American distributors. Companeros cost about $500,000 and was shot in Spain. Corbucci used his trademark mix of comedy and violence, with slapstick scenes immediately followed by brutal killings. That tonal whiplash makes the violence more disturbing because you're never sure if you're supposed to laugh or be horrified. The film was cut heavily for American release, removing political dialogue and graphic violence. The full version remained difficult to see outside Europe until home video. Critics dismissed it as spaghetti western excess, missing the genuine political anger driving the violence. Number 8. Soldier Blue.
Well, we've got to do something.
You can watch.
What are you talking about?
They're gonna rape me, Soldier Blue, and then they're...
Ralph Nelson directed Soldier Blue in 1970, and it remains one of the most controversial westerns ever made. The film depicts the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, where Colorado militia slaughtered over 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women, children, and elderly. Nelson filmed the massacre with graphic brutality that shocked audiences and censors worldwide. Candice Bergen plays Cresta Lee, a white woman who lived with the Cheyenne and understands their humanity. Peter Strauss plays Honus Gant, a naive cavalry soldier. The film follows them across hostile territory, and everything builds toward the massacre that closes the film. Those final 20 minutes are almost unwatchable. The massacre scene shows soldiers hacking off body parts, shooting pregnant women, smashing children's heads with rifle butts. Nelson used gallons of fake blood and graphic prosthetics to create images that resembled Viet Cong massacre photographs. The parallels to My Lai were deliberate. Nelson wanted Americans to confront their history of atrocities. The film was immediately banned or heavily censored in multiple countries. Britain initially gave it an X rating, then reclassified it after protests. Germany banned it outright. Australia cut 13 minutes of violence. American critics called it obscene and exploitative. This MPAA threatened an X rating before agreeing to R with minor cuts. Soldier Blue cost just over $1 million and made modest returns despite the controversy. AVCO Embassy marketed it as an exploitation film, which angered Nelson. He wanted serious political discourse about American violence against Native Americans. Instead, he got grindhouse bookings and moral panic. The film's defenders argued the graphic violence is necessary to convey the horror of what actually happened. Sand Creek really occurred, and sanitizing it dishonors the victims. Critics counter that showing extreme violence against women and children, even to make an anti-war point, is still exploitation. The controversy overshadowed everything else about Soldier Blue. The performances are good, the cinematography is competent, but all anyone remembers is the massacre. The film proved you could make audiences confront historical atrocities, but they'd hate you for it. Number 7. A Town Called Bastard. Robert Parrish directed A Town Called Bastard, also released as A Town Called Hell, in 1971, and it's one of the most sadistic westerns ever made. The film is set during the Mexican Revolution and follows multiple characters seeking revenge in a town where everyone has committed atrocities. Telly Savalas, Robert Shaw, and Stella Stevens lead a cast of people torturing and murdering each other for 90 minutes. The film opens with revolutionaries massacring priests in a church, machine gunning them at the altar. It establishes immediately that no one is safe and nothing is sacred. From there, the violence escalates. People are crucified. A man is buried up to his neck and trampled by horses. Another is dragged to death behind a motorcycle. What makes A Town Called Bastards shocking is how pointless the violence feels. There's a plot involving hidden gold and revenge, but it's incoherent. Characters appear and disappear. Motivations shift randomly. The film seems interested only in staging elaborate torture sequences, not in telling a coherent story. Robert Shaw plays a priest who might be a revolutionary in disguise, or might actually be a priest. The film never clarifies. He tortures people to extract information while maintaining his religious facade. The hypocrisy is the point. Parrish suggesting revolution and religion are both excuses for cruelty. The film was shot in Spain for about $1.5 million. Parrish, an American director who'd made solid films like Casino Royale, completely lost control of the production. The script was rewritten constantly. Actors improvised because they didn't understand their characters. The result is a chaotic mess. British censors demanded extensive cuts before agreeing to classify it. The BBFC called it one of the most violent films they'd seen. American distributors released it with an R rating, but minimal promotion, letting it die in drive-ins and grindhouses. Critics universally panned it. Variety called it an ugly, pointless exercise in sadism. Roger Ebert didn't review it, presumably finding it beneath notice. The film has no defenders, even among exploitation enthusiasts. It's just brutal and empty. Number 6. The Great Silence.
A volte mi capita di pensare a voce alta. Un buon soldato non pensa. Certo, non bisogna pensare, solo il regolamento.
Sergio Corbucci directed The Great Silence in 1968, and its ending is so bleak that American distributors demanded Corbucci shoot an alternate happy ending just to make it releasable. He did, but the European version kept his original vision. The most nihilistic conclusion in Western history, Jean-Louis Trintignant plays Silence, a mute gunfighter who hunts bounty coolers in a snow-covered Utah town. Klaus Kinski plays Loco, the most vicious bounty killer in the territory. The film builds toward their confrontation, and genre conventions suggest the hero will triumph. Instead, Loco shoots Silence in the hand, crippling him, then murders him and massacres the townspeople he was protecting. The ending was unprecedented. The villain wins completely. The hero dies. Innocent people are slaughtered. There's no justice, no redemption, nothing but Loco riding away unpunished while bodies freeze in the snow. Corbucci refused to soften it, arguing this was closer to historical reality than happy endings. The film was shot in the Italian Dolomites during brutal winter conditions. The cast suffered genuine cold and exhaustion, filming in snow and sub-zero temperatures. That misery translates to screen, making The Great Silence one of the most physically oppressive westerns ever made. American distributors hated the ending and barely released the film. It played scattered theaters in 1975, 7 years after its European release, and disappeared quickly. The original ending wasn't widely available in America until home video decades later. Critics who saw it were divided. Some called the ending powerful and honest. Others found it nihilistic and punishing. Audiences definitely weren't ready for a Western, where the hero loses and evil triumphs. The film traumatized viewers expecting traditional genre satisfaction. The Great Silence influenced later revisionist Westerns, proving endings didn't have to be happy to be effective. But its commercial failure also demonstrated that American audiences had limits on how much bleakness they'd accept. Number 5. Blindman.
The mail-order brides. Stolen. One man has a contract, and he's gonna deliver.
I want my 50 women.
With 50 beautiful women he stole from Blindman. Now Blindman wants those women back.
Ferdinando Baldi directed Blindman in 1971, and it's one of the most gleefully sadistic westerns Italy ever produced. Tony Anthony plays a blind gunfighter double-crossed and left for dead. He tracks down the gang that stole 50 mail-order brides he was escorting, and his revenge involves creative torture and mass slaughter. The film's violence is excessive and often played for dark comedy. The blind protagonist uses a rifle with a shotgun attached, firing randomly and hitting people through sheer luck. He beats prisoners with his cane. He blows up a monastery full of bandits. The body count exceeds 100, and many deaths are played as grotesque jokes. What made Blindman controversial was its treatment of women. The 50 kidnapped brides are treated as property throughout, sold and traded like cattle. There are implications of sexual violence that the film doesn't show, but doesn't condemn either. The whole premise is deeply uncomfortable, despite the comedic tone. Ringo Starr appears as a bandit leader, in a bizarre bit of stunt casting. His presence suggests the film should be campy fun, but the violence is too graphic and the asexual politics too ugly for the humor to land. The tonal confusion makes everything feel exploitative. The film was shot in Spain for about $300,000. Baldi used extreme wide shots and brutal close-ups of violence, creating a visual style that's distinctive but alienating. The score by Stelvio Cipriani is surprisingly good, better than the film deserves. Blindman was banned in several countries and heavily cut in others. The BBFC demanded cuts to asexual violence before classifying it. American distributors released it as a double feature with other exploitation westerns, marketing it to audiences who wanted transgressive content. The film made minimal money and is mostly forgotten except by spaghetti western completists. It represents the genre at its most nihilistic and exploitative, pushing boundaries purely for shock value. Number 4. Get Mean.
But oh, and they just keep putting it to you, buddy. And they're stomping on you.
Ferdinando Baldi directed Get Mean in 1975, and it might be the most insane western ever made. Tony Anthony returns as the stranger, now fighting Vikings, Moors, and Spanish conquistadors in medieval Spain while searching for buried treasure. The film is violent, surreal, and completely incoherent. The plot makes no sense. The stranger is transported back in time, or maybe to an alternate dimension, where historical periods overlap randomly. He fights barbarians with swords and guns. He's crucified and survives. He battles an army while hallucinating. The script feels like it was written by someone having a fever dream. The violence is cartoonish but graphic. Heads are chopped off. People are burned alive. The stranger guns down dozens of enemies in sequences that feel more like video games than westerns. Baldi films it all with garish colors and zooms that make everything look cheap and surreal. What got Get Mean in trouble with censors was the sexual violence. Multiple rape scenes are played for uncomfortable comedy. Women are treated as objects to be fought over. The film has a deeply misogynistic streak that's hard to watch even by 70s exploitation standards. The film cost about $400,000 and was shot in Spain using leftover costumes from other productions. That explains the random Vikings and Moors. Baldi was using whatever was available. The production values are terrible, making the whole thing feel like a fever dream. Get Mean was barely released theatrically. Some European countries banned it outright. American distributors ignored it entirely until home video decades later. Critics who saw it called it incomprehensible garbage. Even Tony Anthony fans struggled to defend it. The film has developed a tiny cult following among people who appreciate its complete insanity. It's not good, but it's so bizarre and violent that it demands attention. Number 3. Django Sergio.
Time hasn't come yet.
Corbucci directed the original Django in 1966, and it set the template for ultra-violent spaghetti westerns. Franco Nero plays Django, a mysterious gunfighter dragging a coffin through a mud-soaked town. The coffin contains a machine gun, and Django uses it to massacre an entire gang in one of the most influential sequences in Western history. The film's violence was unprecedented for 1966. Django's hands are crushed with rifle butts, shown in graphic close-up. Men are shot and fall into mud that looks like blood. The ear-cutting scene influenced Tarantino decades later. British censors banned the film entirely, and it remained illegal in the UK until 1993. What makes Django shocking isn't just the graphic violence, but how casually it's presented. Django culls dozens of people without remorse or consequence. The film doesn't judge him or present his violence as tragic. He's just good at killing, and that skill is all that matters in Corbucci's nihilistic vision of the West. The film was shot in 6 weeks for about $100,000 using mud from constant rain as a free production design element. Corbucci embraced the filth, making Django the dirtiest Western ever made. Everyone is covered in mud and blood, creating a visual style that influenced countless imitators. Franco Nero became a star based on this performance. He plays Django as dead-eyed and emotionless, a man so traumatized by violence that he's become a violence machine. That characterization influenced anti-heroes from Clint Eastwood to Keanu Reeves. Django spawned over 30 unofficial sequels and became one of the most influential Westerns ever made, but the original remained banned in multiple countries for decades. Germany, UK, Australia all refused to classify it. The film's reputation as forbidden fruit only increased its cult status. The influence is undeniable. Tarantino named an entire film after it. The Machine Gun Massacre has been homaged countless times. Django proved Westerns could be as violent as horror films, and audiences would embrace them. Number 2. Johnny Yuma. Romolo Guerrieri directed Johnny Yuma in 1966, also known as Johnny Yuma Il Vendicatore, and it's one of the most sadistic revenge westerns Italy produced. Mark Damon plays Johnny Yuma, a man who returns from the Civil War to find his family murdered and his land stolen. His revenge is methodical, creative, and extraordinarily violent. The film includes torture sequences that push boundaries even for Italian westerns. A man is slowly crushed under a water wheel. Another is branded with hot irons repeatedly. Yuma doesn't just kill his enemies, he makes them suffer in ways designed to maximize pain. The film dwells on that suffering with close-ups and extended takes. What made Johnny Yuma particularly controversial was its nihilistic worldview. Everyone in the film is corrupt or cowardly. The local priest is complicit in the murders. The sheriff is bought and paid for. The townspeople watch atrocities and do nothing. Yuma's violence is presented as the only appropriate response to a world with no justice or morality. The film was shot in Italy and Spain for minimal budget. Guerrieri used harsh lighting and extreme close-ups to create a claustrophobic atmosphere despite outdoor settings. The score by Nora Orlandi is unconventional, using harpsichord and experimental sounds that make everything feel off-kilter. British censors banned Johnny Yuma, refusing to classify it for any audience. The sadism was too extreme, the nihilism too complete. Other European countries cut substantial violence before allowing release. The full version remained difficult to see for decades. American distributors barely released it, changing the title and cutting violence to get an acceptable rating. The film played scattered drive-ins and disappeared. Mark Damon, who went on to become a successful producer, later said he regretted making it. Johnny Yuma has no real defenders. It's too mean-spirited and sadistic even for exploitation fans, but represents the absolute extreme of spaghetti western violence, the point where the genre became indistinguishable from horror. Number 1. The Wild Bunch. Sam Peckinpah directed The Wild Bunch in 1969, and it remains the most violent mainstream Western ever released. The film redefined how violence could be depicted on screen, using slow motion, multiple cameras, and extreme blood squibs to create sequences that were beautiful, horrifying, and completely unprecedented. The opening massacre establishes the film's approach. A robbery goes wrong, and gunfire erupts in a town square during a temperance parade. Innocent bystanders are cut down. Blood explodes from bodies. Children watch the carnage. The sequence goes on for minutes, piling up bodies while the audience sits in shocked silence. But it's the finale that got the Wild Bunch its reputation. The 4 remaining members of the bunch walk into a Mexican compound, knowing they're going to die. What follows is 15 minutes of sustained violence unlike anything cinema had seen. Hundreds of people die. The bunch is torn apart by bullets, but keeps fighting. Blood sprays, bodies convulses. The carnage is relentless. Peckinpah used over 90,000 rounds of blank ammunition filming the final battle. He shot with multiple cameras at different speeds, then edited the footage into balletic, slow-motion death. The technique was revolutionary and controversial. Critics called it pornographic. The audience walked out. Veterans had panic attacks. The MPAA initially wanted to give The Wild Bunch an X rating, which would have killed it commercially. Peckinpah agreed to minor cuts, removing a few seconds of the most extreme violence. Even cut, the film was rated R and considered almost unwatchable by mainstream standards. Warner Brothers released it in June 1969, and it became both controversial and profitable. It made over $10 million domestically, despite the R rating and moral panic. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece. Others called it sick and depraved. The debate continues 55 years later. What makes The Wild Bunch's violence matter is that Peckinpah doesn't glorify it. The finale is horrifying and tragic, not triumphant. The bunch dies for nothing, accomplishing nothing except their own destruction. The violence is excessive to make it unbearable, to force audiences to confront what frontier violence actually meant. The film changed cinema forever. Every action director since has borrowed Peckinpah's techniques. The slow-motion gunfight is now a cliché, but in 1969, it was shocking and new. The Wild Bunch proved Westerns could be art and still deliver visceral excitement, even if that excitement came with trauma. These Westerns didn't just show violence. They wallowed in it, used it to provoke and disturb, pushed it until censors had no choice but to intervene. Some were making political points, others were just sadistic. All of them crossed lines most filmmakers respected, and paid the price with bans, cuts, and controversy that never quite disappeared.